The Galactic Empire laughed at the human Diplomat until he said, "You attacked Earth. Part 1. The nobody from a nobody planet." The laughter hit me before the doors even finished opening. I walked into the grand concourse of the Talvari Senate, and somewhere in that vast gleaming hall, a creature with 4 arms and a voice like a foghorn said something in Talvari that I did not fully understand. But I understood the laughter that followed. Laughter sounds the same in every language. It curls the same way. It lands the same way, and it was aimed at me. My name is Marcus Hale. I am 43 years old. I was born in a small town in England. I studied political science at university, and I spent 17 years working in international relations before the United Nations handed me the strangest job offer in human history. The offer read, in plain language, "Go to the Galactic Senate, represent Earth, and do not embarrass us." I had a briefcase, a navy blue suit, and a notebook. That was all I brought. No weapons, no team, no backup of any kind. Just me, a notebook, and the quiet knowledge of what I was about to do. But I am getting ahead of myself. The grand concourse was enormous. I do not mean enormous the way a cathedral is enormous, or even the way a stadium is enormous. I mean the kind of enormous that makes your brain question its own sense of scale. The ceiling was so high that actual clouds formed near the top, thin white wisps drifting between columns of pale stone. The floor was polished to a mirror shine, and every step I took echoed in ways that reminded me just how alone I was in that space. There were thousands of beings inside, representatives from over 200 species, each one seated at curved benches arranged in rings around a central speaking platform. They wore robes, armor, biosuits, and things I had no word for. They communicated through translators embedded in the walls, and the hum of 100 different languages filled the air like a low electrical current. And I was the smallest thing in the room. I do not say that to be dramatic. I say it because it is simply true. Humans are not a physically impressive species. We are medium-sized, soft-skinned, and slow compared to most of what was sitting in that hall. The Talvari alone averaged 9 feet tall. The Dravathi, seated near the far wall, had 4 eyes and bodies built like armored vehicles. Even the Sen, who were considered a delicate species by galactic standards, had bioluminescent skin that glowed with quiet authority. I had a navy blue suit and a notebook. Senator Keth of the Talvari met me at the entrance. He was tall, silver-skinned, and dressed in a ceremonial coat that probably cost more than a year of my salary. He looked at me the way a person looks at something they stepped on by accident. His translator crackled, and then his voice came through in English. "Welcome," he said, "to the Grand Concourse of the Galactic Senate. You are the representative of the Dirt Sphere, yes?" Behind him, across the polished floor, something heard that translation and laughed. Then someone else laughed, and then it spread, the way laughter always does, jumping from bench to bench until the hall was filled with the sound. I smiled. I straightened my tie. I said, "Thank you, Senator. I'm glad to be here." He blinked. He had clearly expected something else. Embarrassment, maybe, or a stumbling attempt at dignity. He got neither. What he got was me walking calmly to the seat they had assigned me near the far door, a plain chair that did not match any of the other seating in the hall, set slightly apart from the nearest bench, as though proximity to Earth's representative might be contagious. I sat down, opened my notebook to the first page, and waited. Here is something I had learned in 17 years of diplomacy. The most dangerous thing you can do to a person who is laughing at you is refuse to be hurt by it. Because the moment you stop reacting the way they expect, they start wondering why. And the moment they start wondering why, the power in the room begins, very slowly, to shift. I did not need the power to shift yet. I just needed them to keep underestimating me for a little while longer. I had been assigned 3 minutes of speaking time. 3 minutes was what the Galactic Senate gave to provisional observers, which was the classification given to species who had not yet met the membership requirements. The requirements were, by design, nearly impossible for any young species to meet. You needed a functioning interstellar fleet, 2 or more established colonies outside your home system, and a minimum of 50 years of recorded contact with another spacefaring civilization. Earth had none of those things. Earth was here only because we had formally requested observer status, and the Senate had granted it, as a kind of politeness, the way you give a child a seat at the adult table, because turning them away would feel unnecessarily cruel. I was the child at the adult table, and I had exactly 3 minutes. Earth had been observed by the Galactic Empire for just over 200 years. Our first radio transmissions reached them in the late 19th century, faint signals crawling across space at the speed of light. By the time they reached Talvari space, the Empire was already debating whether to make contact. They decided not to. We were too primitive, too disorganized, too prone to conflict among ourselves. The official classification in their records, which we had decoded 14 years ago, was Class D emergent, no strategic value, no threat potential, no recommended action. No recommended action. That was what we were to them, a note in a file, a line in a database. A small warm world spinning around an ordinary star, doing nothing of importance. For 200 years, we sat there doing nothing of importance. And then 18 months ago, something changed. Something happened in the social system that the empires decided did not need to be reported, recorded, or acknowledged. Something they believed Earth could not prove. Something they were absolutely, completely, catastrophically wrong about. But I was not going to talk about that yet. I sat in my small chair near the far door, and I watched the Senate go about its business. I listened to debates about trade routes and resource rights. I watched ambassadors who had never visited Earth lecture each other about the stability of the outer systems. I watched Senator Keth command the room with the easy confidence of someone who had never once been challenged by anything smaller than him. I took notes, not on the debates, not on the politics, on everything else. The way the arbiter called on speakers in a specific order. The clause Keth cited when he wanted to override a procedural objection. The exact wording of the legal statutes displayed on the wall screens when a question of interstellar law came up for review. I wrote it all down in my plain paper notebook, with my plain ballpoint pen, in my plain English handwriting. At one point, Grand Arbiter Soreth noticed me writing. Soreth was the most powerful individual in the room. He was not Talvari. He was Kesvari, a species so old that their homeworld had been gone for 3,000 years, absorbed into a star that expanded while they had long since spread across the galaxy. He was thin, gray-skinned, and ancient in a way that made the word ancient feel insufficient. He presided over the Senate with the patience of something that had outlived entire civilizations. He looked at me. He looked at my notebook. He looked back at me. "What are you writing?" he asked. "Notes," I said. "On what?" "Your laws," I said. "Specifically the ones about sovereign systems and acts of war." The display on the wall mentioned Article 7 during the Velthari dispute earlier. I just wanted to make sure I understood it correctly. Soreth tilted his head slightly. Something moved behind his eyes. Not alarm, not yet. Just a very faint curiosity, like a man who hears a sound he cannot quite place. "You're thorough," he said, and it was not entirely a compliment. "We try to be," I said. He turned back to the proceedings. I turned back to my notes. The laughter had stopped a while ago. Nobody was looking at me the way they had when I first walked in. They were not looking at me much at all, actually, which was exactly where I needed things to be. I had one day left before I was called to the floor. One day to sit quietly, take notes, and let them believe that Earth had sent its most forgettable man to ask politely for a seat at the table. One day before everything in that hall changed. I looked down at my notebook. The page was nearly full. I turned to a clean sheet, clicked my pen, and kept writing. Part 2, let them laugh. I was taking notes. The second day in the Galactic Senate started the same way the first one had ended, with me in my plain chair near the far door, and every other being in the hall operating as though I was not there. I preferred it that way. My name had not appeared on a single agenda item. I had not been introduced to any other delegation. The closest thing I had to a social interaction was a brief nod from a junior Sen official who had apparently decided that acknowledging a human was not politically damaging enough to avoid. I nodded back. That was the extent of my networking. The Senate was in full session, and the main item on the schedule was a territorial dispute between the Velthari Compact and the Dravathi Dominion over 3 uninhabited systems in the Outer Arc. It was exactly as interesting as it sounds. Ambassadors spoke. Maps appeared on the wall screens. Legal precedents were quoted at length. At one point, a Dravathi representative became so agitated that his bioluminescence shifted from blue to a deep, pulsing orange, and 3 of his colleagues had to place their hands on his shoulders to calm him down. I wrote down the legal citation he was arguing against. It was from the same Article 7 framework that covered acts of war between member and non-member civilizations. I underlined it. Here is what most people do not know about the Galactic Empire's legal structure. Because most people do not spend 14 years quietly decoding their transmitted records. It is old, and because it is old, it is full of clauses that were written for situations that no longer exist but were never removed. One of those clauses was added approximately 800 years ago when the Empire was expanding aggressively and needed a legal mechanism to hold member worlds accountable for attacks carried out by their military forces, even against non-member civilizations. The clause stated, in the Empire's own legal language, that any military action taken by a member state against a world classified as a sovereign inhabited system constituted an act of war, regardless of whether the targeted world held member status. It further stated that the targeted world had the right to present its case before the full Senate, and that the Senate was legally obligated to acknowledge the complaint and respond within 30 standard cycles. The clause had not been invoked in over 300 years. Most members of the Senate had likely forgotten it existed. I had not forgotten it. I had read it approximately 40 times. I had a copy of the original text, translated into English, in the back of my notebook. I was thinking about it when Grand Arbiter Soreth called a recess in the territorial proceedings and turned to the far side of the hall. "The observer from Earth," he said. I looked up from my notes. "The Senate will hear your statement tomorrow morning. You have been allocated 3 minutes of floor time. I would advise using them carefully." The way he said it was not unkind. It was the tone of someone giving instructions to a child before a school performance. Gentle, slightly bored, already thinking about something else. "I understand," I said. "Thank you, Grand Arbiter." He nodded and turned back to the hall. Someone near the Talvari benches made a quiet comment in their own language. I did not catch all of it, but I caught the word for small, which they used in the same way you would use it about something you were not worried about. I wrote 3 words in my notebook. Article 7 confirmed. Then I closed the notebook and let myself think about home for a moment. I thought about a morning about a year and a half ago. I had been sitting in a briefing room in Geneva with 12 other people, all of them looking at the same data on the same screen, all of them very quiet. The data was a set of readings from the monitoring station we had placed near Mars, a modest facility staffed by a rotating crew designed to track galactic transmissions and gather data on deep space activity. Nothing dramatic, just a listening post. Except that 18 months ago it had stopped transmitting. We sent a probe. The probe found debris. Specifically, it found what had been a fully functional space station, reduced in under 4 minutes to scattered wreckage. The debris field contained the remains of the station itself, and scattered among the metal and frozen equipment, the remains of 4,211 people. The probe also found something else, fragments, pieces of hull plating, engine components, and a guidance module that had not come from our station. They had come from somewhere else entirely. Our engineers took 6 weeks to identify the alloy compositions. Then they spent another 2 weeks triple-checking the results, because none of them wanted to be the person who reported what those alloys meant. They were Talvari Imperial Navy. The fragments belonged to a class of vessel used exclusively by the Empire's deep-range military fleet. Somebody had come to our solar system. Somebody had found our station. And somebody had decided that 4,211 people were not worth the trouble of leaving alive. Then they left, and they did not report it, and they did not acknowledge it. And they apparently decided that Earth would never be able to prove anything, because what was Earth going to do? We were a Class D world. We were a note in a file. We were no recommended action. I sat in that briefing room in Geneva and looked at the faces of the 12 other people around the table, and I understood something clearly. This was not a moment for grief, though grief was there. This was not a moment for outrage, though outrage was also there. This was a moment for something much colder and much more careful. We could not fight the Galactic Empire. Not openly. Not with what we had. We were a planet with primitive spaceflight and no military presence beyond our own atmosphere. If we transmitted an accusation, they would deny it, and every species in the galaxies would look to the Empire for guidance on how to respond to a primitive world-making noise. We needed to be smarter than that. We needed to be so far ahead of what they expected that by the time they understood what was happening, the only remaining question was whether to accept our terms or explain to the full Senate why they had killed 4,000 people and thought nobody would notice. So we started working. While I spent the following year studying galactic law, a team of engineers back home was doing something else entirely. The debris from the destroyed station included pieces of a Talvari drive system. The principle behind it was not entirely foreign to our theoretical models. We had been working on similar concepts for decades, but without the resources to test them. Having actual physical components changed that calculation significantly. I did not know the details of what they built or how they built it. That was not my part of the plan. My part was this room, this chair, this notebook, and tomorrow morning. That evening, after the Senate recessed, I walked the long corridor back to the minimal quarters assigned to the Earth Observer. A small room near the lower levels, with a cot, a table, and a window that looked out over the city below. The city was called Vel-Sorath, and it had existed for longer than our species had been using written language. It was beautiful in a way that felt slightly threatening, the way very large, very old things sometimes do. I sat at the table, opened my notebook, and read through everything I had written over the past 2 days. Every legal citation, every procedural rule, every name, every title, every clause. I read it all, and then I read it again, and then I closed the notebook and looked out the window for a while. Somewhere out there, beyond the lights of this ancient city, was a fleet that had come to our solar system and done something unforgivable. And somewhere out there, right now, 3 deep space listening posts that belonged to that fleet had gone dark in ways their operators had not yet been able to explain. I thought about a man named Owen Carter, who had been the shift supervisor on the Martian station the night it was destroyed. I had read his file. He had a daughter named Lucy, who was 11 years old and lived with her mother in New Zealand. I had never met Owen Carter. I would never meet him. But I had thought about him almost every day for 18 months, and I thought about him now, looking out over the lights of Velsorath. I owed him 3 minutes I was going to use every second. I set my notebook on the table, lay down on the cot, and closed my eyes. I had been over the statement so many times that I could recite it in my sleep, and I probably would. It was not a long statement. It did not need to be. The evidence did the work. The law did the work. I just needed to stand up and say the words. Outside, the city hummed and glowed. Somewhere above me, in the upper levels of this building, ambassadors from 200 species were having dinners and debates and conversations about trade routes and border agreements, and not one of them was thinking about Earth. By this time tomorrow, that would no longer be the case. I closed my eyes and slept better than I had in months. Part 3. The sentence that stopped a galaxy. They called my name at the start of the morning session, not with any particular ceremony. Senator Keth simply read from the schedule in his flat, bored voice and said that the Galactic Senate would now hear the 3-minute address from the provisional observer representing Earth's Sol System, Class D designation, Outer Rim. He said it the way you would read out a footnote. He said it the way you would announce that the break room was out of a particular beverage. I stood up from my chair near the door, picked up my briefcase, and walked to the speaking platform at the center of the hall. The platform was a raised circle of stone, about 4 meters across, positioned at the lowest point of the tiered Senate floor, so that every member could look down at whoever was speaking. This was deliberate. The architecture of the hall was designed to remind the speaker of their position relative to the assembled authority of the galaxy. It worked. Standing on that platform was like standing at the bottom of a very deep bowl, with thousands of eyes arranged in rings above you, all of them looking down. I set my briefcase on the platform. I straightened my jacket. I looked up at the hall. The noise did not stop immediately. There were still side conversations, whispered discussions, the low hum of ongoing translation feeds. A few representatives were not even looking at me. One of the Dravathi officials appeared to be reading something on a small device. Near the top tier, a group of Sen were talking quietly among themselves. I did not begin speaking. I stood there and waited. After about 15 seconds, the Sendin group noticed I had not started and went quiet. The Dravathi official looked up from his device. The side conversations dropped one by one until the hall was almost completely silent. Not because I had done anything dramatic, just because silence, held long enough, draws attention the way loud noises do. Grand Arbiter Soreth looked at me from his elevated seat at the head of the hall. His expression was unreadable, but he did not tell me to begin. He was waiting, same as everyone else. I let the silence last 2 more seconds. Then I opened my briefcase, removed a small chip and placed it on the surface of the platform. Then I looked up. 18 months ago, I said, a fleet of 34 vessels entered our solar system. The Sol System, Earth System, my voice was steady. The translators in the walls carried it outward in a dozen languages simultaneously, and I could feel the slight vibration of the broadcast system beneath my feet. These vessels traveled to the orbit of Mars, where Earth had placed a monitoring station staffed by a rotating crew. The station was not a military installation. It carried no weapons. It posed no threat to anyone. The fleet destroyed it in under 4 minutes. There was no reaction yet. The hall was still. People were listening. 4,211 people were on that station. None of them survived. I heard something move in the upper tiers, a shifting of weight, a rustling. Not yet the kind of reaction I expected. That was still coming. Right now, they were still deciding what kind of statement this was. The debris field left behind included fragments of hull material, engine components, and a guidance module. These fragments were analyzed by our engineers over a period of 8 weeks. The alloy compositions, manufacturing signatures, and drive system specifications are documented on the data chip I have placed on this platform. I put my hand flat on the data chip. They are Talvari Imperial Navy, Specifically, they match the technical profile of the Talvari Deep Range Military Fleet Class Designation 7, which operates exclusively under direct Imperial authority. Now it happened. The noise started somewhere in the Talvari section and spread outward like a wave breaking. Voices rose. I heard the word impossible in 4 different languages almost simultaneously. I heard the Talvari word for fabrication, which I had looked up specifically because I knew I would hear it. I heard Senator Keth's voice above the others, sharp and rising, saying something that the translators rendered as this is an outrage, and these claims are baseless. I did not raise my voice. I did not step back. I stood on that platform with my hand flat on the data chip and waited for the noise to settle. It took a full minute. Grand Arbiter Soreth did not call for order. He was watching me. When the noise dropped to a manageable level, I continued. 2 days ago, I asked Grand Arbiter Soreth about the provisions of Article 7 of the Empire's Interstellar Law Framework, specifically the clause governing military action taken by a member state against a sovereign inhabited world, regardless of that world's membership status. The Grand Arbiter confirmed on the floor of this Senate that such action constitutes an act of war under Imperial law. Dead silence. Soreth's face had not changed expression, but he had gone very, very still. Earth is not here to declare war, I said. We are not here to demand punishment or to ask this Senate to take sides. We are here because 4,211 of our people were killed, and the law of this very institution says that we have the right to be heard. That is all we are doing. We are being heard. I picked up the data chip and held it up so the entire hall could see it. The evidence is on this chip. Every alloy composition, every drive signature, every fragment coordinate is documented and independently verifiable. We are submitting it as formal testimony before this Senate entered into permanent record under Article 7, subsection 4, which requires the Senate to acknowledge and respond to any documented act of war against a sovereign world within 30 standard cycles. I set the chip back down. We also have one additional item to present, but I would like to address the Grand Arbiter directly before I do. Soreth looked at me. Grand Arbiter, I said, Earth has already responded to this attack. We did not come here first. We acted first. We are here now to present the terms under which we are willing to consider the matter resolved. The silence that followed was a different kind of a silence from any that had come before. It was the silence of a room full of very old, very powerful beings, suddenly realizing that the small, soft-skinned creature standing at the bottom of their bowl had not come to ask for anything. I had come to tell them something. I picked up my briefcase, left the data chip on the platform, and walked back to my chair. Senator Keth was on his feet. 3 other Talvari representatives were on their feet. Everyone was talking. Grand Arbiter Soreth sat above it all, completely still, watching me sit down, open my notebook, and begin to write. The session broke into chaos. Soreth let it run for a while. He was thinking. After several minutes, he called for order. The hall went quiet, the way it always did when he asked, because even in chaos, no one in that room wanted to be the person who ignored the Grand Arbiter. The Earth Observer, he said, will attend a private session this afternoon. The data chip will be taken into Senate custody and examined by the Independent Verification Office. All proceedings related to this matter are now entered under formal record. He looked at me. You said Earth has already responded, he said. Explain that. I will, I said. This afternoon, he held my gaze for a moment, then he turned to the hall and declared a recess. The noise that followed was tremendous. I could hear it all the way from my small chair near the door, where I was quietly writing in my notebook, letting the storm move around me. I had one name written at the top of the page, Owen Carter. I underlined it, closed the notebook, and waited for the afternoon. Part 4. What already responded means. The private session was held in a chamber on the upper level of the Senate building, a room built to feel intimate by the standards of the Grand Concourse, which meant it was only slightly larger than a school gymnasium. There was a long table of dark stone, high-backed chairs arranged along both sides, and windows that looked out over the rooftops of Vel Soreth under an orange afternoon sky. Grand Arbiter Soreth sat at the head of the table. To his left were 4 senior senators, including 1 Talvari representative who was not Senator Keth. To his right were 3 members of the Independent Verification Office, who had already been examining the data chip since the recess began. At the far end of the table across from Soreth was me, no briefcase this time, just me and my notebook. Soreth let the room stay quiet for a moment after everyone had settled. Outside, the city moved and hummed, completely unaware of what was being discussed 40 floors above its streets. You said Earth has already responded, Soreth said. I want to understand exactly what that means. It means what it sounds like, I said. Earth has no military fleet. Earth has no vessels capable of interstellar travel. Earth has no presence outside its own system beyond the station that was destroyed. He said this as a list of facts, not as a challenge. He was giving me the opportunity to explain how those facts and my statement could both be true at the same time. I reached into my jacket pocket and removed a single folded sheet of paper. I unfolded it and set it on the table, facing toward him so he could read it. It contained a list of coordinates. 3 sets, each one precise to 10 decimal places. Those are the locations of 3 deep-range listening posts operated by the Talvari Imperial Navy, I said. They are located at the outer edge of the Talvari home system, in the Velith corridor and in the deep survey region designated NT7. They are used for military intelligence gathering across a significant section of Imperial space. Soreth looked at the paper. He did not pick it up. Were used, I said, past tense. As of approximately 6 months ago, all 3 posts have been non-operational. Very slowly, the Talvari senator to Soreth's left turned and looked at his colleagues. Something passed between them, a look that contained quite a lot of information. None of them wanted to say out loud in front of me. There are explanations for equipment failure, Soreth said carefully. Technical failures, cosmic events. The verification office has the data chip from this morning's session, I said. Once they finish their analysis, they will be able to confirm the alloy signatures. I would suggest that someone in this room also quietly asks the Talvari Naval Command to account for the current operational status of those 3 posts. And while they are doing that, they might also ask for an inventory of any vessels that were deployed to the outer rim approximately 20 months ago. The room was very still. You are suggesting, Soreth said, that Earth is responsible for the loss of those installations. I am not suggesting anything, I said. I am telling you yes. The Talvari senator stood up. He was not as tall as Senator Keth, but he had the same quality of barely controlled authority, the kind that comes from spending decades in rooms where his word was the final one. His translator carried his voice into English with all of its edges intact. This is a fabrication. Earth does not have the technology to locate those posts, let alone reach them. You are making claims that are physically impossible given the limitations of your civilization. I looked at him steadily. 18 months ago, I said, a Talvari military fleet came to our solar system and destroyed a station that had 4,000 people on it. Among the wreckage that fleet left behind were fragments of a Talvari drive system. Our engineers spent the following months studying those fragments. I paused. We are not the same civilization we were 18 months ago. The senator sat down. Soreth had not moved. His hands were folded on the table in front of him, and he was looking at me with the full weight of 3,000 years of galactic history behind his eyes. He was running calculations, not mathematical ones. The kind of calculations that very experienced political minds run when they suddenly realize that a situation they understood completely has turned out to be something entirely different. You reverse-engineered interstellar drive technology, he said. Not a question. Our engineers are very good, I said. In 18 months. Motivation is a powerful resource, I said. When 4,000 people are lost, and you know who is responsible, and you know that the responsible party is powerful enough to simply ignore any complaint you might make, you stop thinking about conventional options. Soreth unfolded his hands and laid them flat on the table. The 3 posts, he said, you destroyed them. They are non-operational, I said. The method is not something I am going to describe in detail. What I can tell you is that it was precise, it was quiet, and no one knew it was us. Nobody knew it was us until this moment in this room. One of the senators to Soreth's right, a Kesari woman named Velanthos, who had not spoken until now, leaned forward slightly. She had a soft, measured voice that carried a great deal of quiet weight. If that is true, she said, then Earth has demonstrated a capability that no one here was aware of. And what concerns me is not what you have already done. It is what we do not know about what you can do. That concern is reasonable, I said. And it is intentional. Everyone at the table looked at me. We needed you to have that concern, I said. We needed every person in this room to sit with the question of what else we might be capable of, because that question is the only thing that makes the next part of this conversation work. Velanthos tilted her head. The next part, the terms, I said. I thought about something in that moment. I thought about the briefing room in Geneva with its 12 quiet people and its terrible data on the screen. I thought about the months that followed, the long, careful work of preparation. I thought about the engineers who had stayed awake for months, working on something that had never been done before, driven by a kind of focused grief that does not shout but does not stop either. I thought about Lucy Carter, who is now 12.5 years old and would never know her father. And I thought about something one of the council members had said to me in the final briefing before I left for the Senate. She had been a retired general named Patricia Holt, a woman who had spent her career understanding how power actually worked, not how it was supposed to work. She had looked at me across the table and said, very plainly, they will only take us seriously when they believe that the cost of not doing so is higher than the cost of doing so. Your job is to make them believe that. I had thought about those words every day since. The Empire has significant advantages over Earth, I said. In fleet strength, in technology, in political reach, in almost every category that matters in a conventional conflict. We are not confused about that. We are not here because we think we can fight the Galactic Empire and win. I looked at Soreth. We are here because we have already demonstrated that we can do things you did not expect, quietly, and without your knowledge. And because the nature of that kind of capability is that once you know we have it, you can never be fully certain of the extent of it. You knew where those 3 posts were because they were your posts. You know where your military assets are. We know some of them too, but you do not know which ones. The Talvari senator had gone completely still. So when you calculate the cost of not addressing our concerns seriously, I said, you have to include the uncertainty. You have to include the question of what else we might know and what we might be willing to do with that knowledge if this conversation goes poorly. That uncertainty is our military. Soreth looked at me for a long time. You came here knowing we might detain you, he said, or worse. The possibility crossed my mind, I said. And I came anyway, I said, because 4,211 people needed someone to come anyway. The room stayed quiet. Outside, the city of Velsoreth turned under its orange sky, ancient and indifferent, moving at the pace of civilizations. While in a stone chamber 40 floors above its streets, the oldest being in the galaxy sat across a table from a man in a navy blue suit and decided what kind of empire it wanted to be. Tell me your terms, Soreth said. Part 5. The terms I had written the terms out 3 times over the past year. The first draft was long, 22 pages. The second draft was 9 pages. The third draft was a single page of plain language with no legal complexity, no diplomatic softening, and nothing that could be misread. I pulled that single page from my notebook. 3 things, I said. Soreth said nothing. The room waited. First, I said, full Senate membership for Earth, not provisional observer status. Full membership, with all the rights and legal protections that come with it. A seat at the table, not a chair near the door. No one at the table reacted visibly. They had expected this one. Second, I said, a formal acknowledgement by the Talvari Imperial Navy that their vessels entered the Sol system and destroyed the Martian monitoring station. Not a private acknowledgement, a public one. Entered into Senate record, available to every member species, permanent and unalterable. The Talvari senator's jaw tightened. This one hurt more. This was not just a diplomatic concession. This was accountability, and accountability in public is a very different thing from accountability behind closed doors. It had lasting weight. It left a mark. Third, I said, a binding resolution, co-signed by no fewer than 12 member species, formally designating the Sol system as a sovereign protected system under imperial law. Any military action against Earth, against its installations, against its vessels, or against its citizens anywhere in the galaxy is to be treated as an action against a protected sovereign world, with all the consequences that status carries. I put the page down. That is the complete list, I said. There is nothing else. No financial payment, no territorial concession from the Talvari, no punishment beyond the acknowledgement. We are not asking for revenge. We are asking for recognition. We want the galaxy to know that we exist, that we can defend ourselves, and that we are not to be casually erased because someone decided we were inconvenient. Vel Anthos spoke first. These terms are not small, she said. No, I agreed. Full membership alone requires a 2/3 vote of the Senate. The acknowledgement will be politically damaging to the Talvari government. The protection resolution requires co-signatories who may not wish to position themselves in opposition to the Talvari. I know, I said. Then why do you believe we will agree to them? I looked at the sheet of paper on the table. Because the alternative, I said, is explaining to the full Senate why you did not. And to do that, you would have to explain the contents of the data chip that is currently being analyzed by your verification office. You would have to explain the attack and why it was not reported and why Earth was not informed and why 4,000 people were considered so unimportant that no one in this government thought the situation required any kind of response. And once you explain all of that in open session, in front of every member species, the question of Earth's membership becomes very simple. Because every civilization in this galaxy has a self-preservation instinct. And the very clear message of the past 18 months is that Earth is the kind of species that does not forget, does not stop, and does not accept the explanation that it was too small to matter. Nobody spoke for a moment. We are not asking you to do this because you feel guilty, I said. You may not feel anything at all. We are asking you to do this because it is the rational choice, because it costs less than the alternative, and because, honestly, it is the right thing to do, and some part of this Senate, some part of this institution that has existed for thousands of years, still knows what the right thing looks like. I looked at Soreth. You have been watching us for 200 years, I said. You classified us as no strategic value, no threat potential, no recommended action. I would like, respectfully, to suggest that the classification needs updating. Something happened in Soreth's face. It was not quite a smile. It was more like the expression of someone who has just heard a piece of music they did not expect and found, against their judgment, that they liked it. It lasted only a moment, then he stood up. We will reconvene the full Senate tomorrow morning, he said. The verification office will present their findings on the data chip. The floor will then be open for deliberation. You will be present. I will be present, I said. He looked at the sheet of paper on the table for a moment, then looked back at me. I have one question, he said. Not a political one, a personal one. Go ahead, I said. Were you afraid, he asked, when you walked in yesterday? When you sat in that chair and heard the laughter? I thought about it honestly. Not of the laughter, I said. No. That was expected, and expected things do not frighten me much. Then what? I was afraid of the moment after, I said. The moment after I said what I had to say. The moment when everyone in that hall understood what it meant, and the response could have gone any direction. That moment, yes, that was frightening. Soreth nodded slowly. And now the moment has passed, I said. And I am still here. He held my gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then he turned and left the room, and the others followed, and I sat alone at the long stone table for a minute, looking out the window at the orange sky over Vel Soreth. I thought about Owen Carter. I thought about the 12 people in the briefing room in Geneva. I thought about Patricia Holt telling me to make them believe. I thought about a team of engineers working through the night for months on something that had never been done, driven by the kind of grief that does not shout, but does not stop. I thought about Lucy Carter, 12 and a half years old, somewhere in New Zealand. I opened my notebook to a clean page. At the top I wrote terms accepted pending vote. Then I sat back and let out a long, slow breath, the kind you take when you have been holding it for a very long time. The next morning, the Senate convened in full. The verification office presented their findings first. The lead analyst, a Kessiri woman with a precise, methodical manner, went through the data chip point by point. Alloy compositions, drive signatures, navigation module serial codes. She cross-referenced each piece of evidence against the Imperial Military Registry, and each time, the match came back confirmed. By the time she finished, the hall was so quiet that I could hear the translation feeds running in the walls. Senator Keth did not speak during the presentation. He sat in his place in the Talvari section and looked straight ahead, and he looked, for the first time since I had seen him, like a man who understood that the situation was no longer within his control. After the verification presentation, Grand Arbiter Soreth opened the floor for deliberation. What followed was 4 hours of debate, and I will not pretend it went smoothly. There were members of the Senate who argued against Earth's membership on procedural grounds. There were members who argued that the acknowledgement resolution set a dangerous precedent. There was one representative from a species called the Arvith who gave a 40-minute address suggesting that Earth's actions in disabling the listening posts constituted aggression, and that we should be the ones facing consequences. I sat in my chair near the door, still the same chair, still near the same door, and I listened to all of it. Then Velanthos stood up. She was not a dramatic speaker. She did not raise her voice. She spoke in the careful, measured tone of someone who had been in that hall for longer than most of the species represented there had existed as spacefaring civilizations. And what she said was this: "We have 2 days arguing about procedures and precedents and political costs. I would like to suggest we spend 2 minutes thinking about what actually happened. A fleet went to a solar system, found a station with 4,000 people on it, and destroyed it. Those people were not soldiers. They were not a threat. They were simply there. And the civilization those people belonged to, which we classified as too small to matter, spent 18 months gathering evidence, developing capabilities none of us knew they had, and then sent one person, alone, with a briefcase and a notebook, to stand on that platform and say, 'We know what you did, and we know what we are capable of doing about it, and we are choosing to do this instead. We are choosing the law. We are choosing this institution. We are choosing to stand in this hall and ask for justice through the proper channels, rather than take it by other means.'" She paused. If this Senate cannot respond appropriately to that, she said, then I am no longer certain what this Senate is for. She sat down. The vote was called 40 minutes later. Full membership for Earth passed with a vote of 147 in favor, 31 against, and 12 abstentions. The acknowledgement resolution, formal, public, permanent, passed with 112 in favor. The Talvari delegation voted against it, which surprised no one, but they were outvoted, and the acknowledgement was entered into the Imperial Senate record, where it will remain for as long as the record exists. The protection resolution passed with 139 in favor and 22 against. It was co-signed by 18 member species before the session ended, 6 more than the required minimum. When Soreth announced the final result, there was no cheering. This was not that kind of room. There was a shift in the air, the way air shifts when something heavy has been put down. A settling. I wrote the results in my notebook. 147, 112, 139. Then I closed the notebook and put my pen in my pocket. A junior Senate official, a young Sen, the same one who had nodded at me on the first day, appeared at my side and said, very quietly, Representative Hale, the Grand Arbiter would like to speak with you before you depart. I followed him to a small anteroom near the main chamber. Soreth was already there, standing at the window. You will need to appoint a permanent representative, he said when I entered. Standard Senate membership requires a confirmed delegate present for all scheduled sessions. We have someone in mind, I said. He nodded. Then he was quiet for a moment, looking out the window. The 3 posts, he said. Just the 3? I understood the question. He was not asking about past events. He was asking me to give him a sense of what Earth knew, what we could reach, what the actual extent of our capability was. I thought about the engineers back home. I thought about what they had built, and what they had said in the final briefing before I left, that the first capability was the foundation, not the ceiling, that the months since had not been idle. I am not in a position to answer that question, I said. Soreth turned from the window and looked at me. No, he said. I did not think you would be. There was something in his voice. Not quite respect, not quite unease. Something in between, the complicated feeling of a being who had lived for thousands of years, and was accustomed to knowing the shape of things encountering something whose shape he could not quite trace. Your species, he said, has a reputation in our records as chaotic, aggressive toward each other, difficult to predict. We determined 2 centuries ago that you were not worth the effort of engagement. I know, I said. We were incorrect. Yes, I said. You were. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he extended one hand, palm upward, in the Keshari gesture of acknowledgement between equals. I had read about it in the records we had decoded. It was not a common gesture. It was used between individuals of significant standing who had concluded a matter of genuine consequence. I placed my hand in his briefly. Then I picked up my briefcase and left. The shuttle back to the transit hub was quiet. I had the passenger compartment to myself, and I sat with my notebook open on my knee, looking at the pages I had filled over the past 3 days. Notes on legal clauses, names and titles, a list of coordinates, 3 vote counts. And at the top of the first page, written before I had even landed on this world, 1 sentence. The sentence I had been building toward for 18 months. 4,211. I looked out the window as Velsoreth fell away below me. The ancient city, older than our writing, older than our agriculture, older than almost everything we had ever built, sitting quietly under its orange sky while the universe turned around it. From up here, it looked small. Everything looked small from far enough away. The shuttle climbed toward the transit hub, and beyond the transit hub, the long journey home. I thought about what came next. The permanent representative, the formal integration into Senate structures, the legal, logistical, and diplomatic work of a civilization stepping into a galactic community that had not expected to admit it. The work that would outlast me by generations, probably. The beginning of something that would take a very long time to fully understand. And somewhere in all of that, the ongoing question that Soreth had asked, and I had not answered. The question that was now our best protection. How much can they do, and how much do they know? Good questions. Important questions. I closed my notebook, leaned back in my seat, and watched the stars appear as the shuttle cleared the upper atmosphere. Someone was going to ask me, when I got home, whether I had been scared. Someone always asked. And the honest answer was the same one I had given Soreth. Not of the laughter, no. Not of the room or the chair near the door, or the 3-minute allocation, or any of the ways the universe had arranged itself to remind me that Earth was small and new and unimportant. What had frightened me was the moment of silence after the sentence. That one still breath before everything changed. The fraction of a second when all of it hung in the air, the evidence, the law, the names of 4,000 people, and the universe had not yet decided what to do with it. But that moment had passed, and I was still here, and so was Earth. Somewhere in New Zealand, a 12-year-old girl named Lucy Carter was going about her day, completely unaware that her father's name had, in a small but real and permanent way, changed the standing of her entire civilization in the galaxy. She would know someday. I made a note to make sure she did. The stars came in clear and sharp, the way they do from high altitude, the way they always have. All those billions of points of light that spent 2 centuries looking down at Earth and deciding we were not worth the trouble. I looked back at them. I did not blink. We were worth the trouble. We always had been.